So some right-leaning people believe they were shadow banned or being shut up or censored on Twitter. There has been some reports of a non-amplify ability has been added to accounts, which was used to hide accounts and hurt their reach from accounts in question for the creators to create quote-unquote hurtful accounts or breaking the rules. However, the account holders were never told this was happening. Musk wishes to change this as he took over. So, it sounds like Twitter did actually censor the Hunter Biden story due to the fact that, again, as we talked about in the Meta linked episode, that it was potentially a misinformation campaign from Russia. The older owner, Jack, who has also said this was a mistake. So to do so, we heard last week's show, as I said, but it wasn't 100% sure. They weren't 100% sure how to act, right? They weren't 100% sure, do we suppress it, do we not, etc. when the story broke. Now, I think this is where we need to be quite careful, and this is, one of the things that, regardless of whether you like Elon or not, he did bring to X or Twitter, now, which is, and I quote, a tweet from November 2022, which was around the time he bought the company, there or thereabouts. The new Twitter policy is for freedom of speech, but not for freedom of reach. Negative/hateful tweets will be max deboosted and demonetized, so no ads or no other revenue from Twitter, and you will only be able to find the tweet unless you won't find the tweet unless you specifically seek it out. There is which is no different from the rest of the internet, and I think this is the important element, right? We saw this with the adpocalypse on YouTube. We also saw this when there's been, and I've specifically recently, since doing the show, had this happen where I posted a video talking about a clip which I made very clear I wasn't 100% sure whether it was true or not, and a bot at TikTok in this case stroked the video, allegedly saying it was against misinformation guidelines and so on, and it specifically said in that misinformation point that it was to do with self-harm. The video didn't talk about self-harm at all. It was about talking about a doctor claiming that the US had put out a lot of misinformation regarding COVID. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I was pointing at the video and saying, this is alarming and this is the reaction. But as we've said, and as we'll get on to a little bit later, TikTok is a private company in the same way Twitter is a private company. So this could be a moral argument to say, well, actually, they can do what they want in that regard. Moving slightly back to the reports and the research I've done on the Twitter files, CNN also reported that those files that were put out maybe have chosen a percentage of those files to make the left look bad. So this is the conversation around there is a specific ideology or a specific set of staff in Twitter, YouTube, etc. And are they leaning into a certain narrative, right? It could be a establishment narrative. It could be they're more agreeing with liberal sides of arguments or liberal thoughts, or the opposite side as well, right? I've talked about in shows that Elon Musk is a right-leaning figure. This could be what is perceived. Now, the question that comes from this is, of course, when a leak like the Twitter files comes out, is it picks and choose? Has it been chosen in that way? Has it been manipulated just to see one side of the argument, right? We've talked about how this is an issue and how this is a concern and why this is technically not a good idea before, but that's what we don't know at the moment. And Jack, who is the old owner of Twitter, has called for what I've found, this hasn't happened yet, but what it has done is, there was a call to release all of the Twitter files in their entirety, right? So independent journalists, so mainstream media, so people like myself, etc., can go through all of them and see what really happened. Now, there was also a conversation and also quite a lot of question marks and quite a lot of, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on in this conversation around the Twitter files, but Trump was banned in the first, as you may remember, in the last couple of days of his term with 88.9 million followers. Now, there was a lot of talk at the time, and there has been a lot of talk since about the fact that that's quite alarming, right? Now, those who don't follow politics, those who think that Trump's just a dick, I don't agree with his politics, that's fine. But Trump's specific strategy, in my understanding, is to be controversial, is to say some outlandish things. It's a very similar strategy to an extent to what we saw with Boris Johnson as well in the UK, where he would deliberately be the Tommy fool, deliberately be the, the vegan kind of joke. That kind of humour, that was his campaign marketing strategy, you could say. Now, does it work? Trump and him and etc., but mostly Trump specifically, understands that the people who will support him, the people that will rally behind him, are slightly more extreme in their views. They are, you could say, again, this is an opinion, but you could say that they're more redneck, they're more, rah, yeah, America, ooh, yeah. In that respect. So he is deliberately going to become memeable, or say, we saw it more recently with his there is obviously the lead up to the US election taking place right now, as it's in, I think it's about 7 weeks at the time of recording, and he made something that was wrong or right, probably maybe not factual, I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but he did say stuff in that debate that became memeable.
Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
I just want to clarify here, you bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
but
television.
But the people
I'm
on
taking
television
it from the city
saying
manager.
their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Right, and I think it was something along the lines of they were eating, cats or dogs or etc. I don't know the full logistics of it, but the point that I'm making here is he's deliberately going to be provoking. He's deliberately going to be a controversial figure to react, and showcase that kind of thought process. But it does also bring out, because you are that kind of, not centrist, it does bring out the opposite side that then quote unquote hates you. At the time of recording as well, we've seen Donald Trump has had 2 attempts on his life in the span of 2 months, and I jokingly said whilst watching the news yesterday, is this going to be a common occurrence? Is this going to be every month before the election? There'll be unfortunately a attempt, at least, on Donald Trump's life. And for the record, I don't think that violence in politics is a good idea, and I don't think violence, and I think there is a level of rhetoric you need to be careful about. But I am getting slightly off point, but I think it does, and this leads into this question around big tech. This leads into this big question around, can a platform such as Twitter that does have power in public discourse, can it censor one side of the political argument? Can it get away with, or feel that it's justifiable to, quote, kick off a president, as many EU leaders were worried about that when it happened, and what does that actually say about the situation, and what does it say about the power, I think, that these conglomerates actually have over public discourse, but also who is being elected and who is being voted in that respect as well. There was also this conversation as well about, did Twitter specifically have a back channel, or were they talking to law enforcement, or were they having consistent meetings with law enforcement, and what potentially would that mean, right? And, you know, I was planning to talk a little bit more in detail about that, but I think what I'll do is I'll just link down to the resources that I have done, and I actually want to get to the question, which was the more important element that was going to end that section of it, which was, there is this conversation around, you know, the monopolies of these big tech companies, and the government is potentially in an antitrust legal proceeding with them, and there is this strange coincidence that, you know, if Twitter, for example, in this case, as we're talking about the Twitter files, we're going to come out and say, well, we are aware of this thing, or these things that we may not like that may go against that agenda, especially as we talked in the Meta's case, where the Biden administration was pushing on Meta to censor specific information that could make their administration look bad. It was this situation where, you know, is it conspiracy theory? Is it thoughts? Is it opinion? I don't know. But, you know, it would be a shame if you were to just miraculously get broken up by a government antitrust lawsuit because you didn't follow suit, is the implied reality, or the implied point of view. And I think that's the question, right? And it doesn't look good for, you know, and it's about those stories, and should people have access to that information anyway, and then be able to make their own critical mind over who to vote for. And I personally think the more information, and this is the argument about why Jack didn't remove some more controversial tweets and some more concerning tweets about, you know, he said, and also I think Elon would agree, that actually having these people on the platform, having them tweet in real time, having them share their views on social media is better than, because you can gain a better gauge on what's going on in their head than, and who you're then voting for, than having them not, and having them silenced, having them banned, and putting them into their own echo chamber. So I know that when Trump was banned, he launched his own social media platform, etc., things like that. And I think that's how we, you know, become more aware, and we become more connected as a populace, because we can take the information for what it is. We can see and we can analyze it, and we can say, okay, well, what is true, what isn't true, what do I like, what do I not like, why do I not like it, etc. And I think that's a potentially better way of having that discourse, especially when we're talking about some stuff that is as important as who wins an election and who potentially you're going to vote for, regardless of your jurisdiction. That is, in a democratic world, that's how we go about it. We choose, we hear information, we hear arguments, and then I would hope that people go and they say, actually, I like this person's view on the world and what they want to do allegedly better than, you know, not. So yeah. So, as also reported by The Hill, the part 2 of the Twitter files showed that a new Twitter files investigation shows that the team of Twitter employees built a blacklist and also to prevent defavourable tweets from trending, and likely limit the visibility to the accounts, including the trending tab as well. All in secret, unknowing to users. Would it be fair for employees to limit a post in trending or accounts, and likely due to their own views, which is kind of what we already alluded to, and say on a topic, say, I don't like X or Y person, but without telling them? And I think that's the key, right? Because, and I suppose it comes back to the question of, there has been this conversation in the research I've done about, you know, we can't be in a situation where you can't critique decisions made by government, because that's how a government will just stonewall whatever happens, right? There was also talk about there's been some accounts removed purely because, and added to trend blacklists and added to their reach and not being really seen by followers, that didn't necessarily say we need violence, didn't necessarily say anything hateful, but questioned a specific decision that was made by an administration. And I'll leave some examples down below, and I'll maybe put some on screen, etc., that show this of some accounts that happened. But it was also reported, you know, should big tech businesses be transparent on how and why they are actually going about sharing or limiting that reach, or quote unquote shadow banning people, and the conversation was, and what it sounded like in some of the later parts of my research on the Twitter files, from what I could find, was that there was this culture at Twitter around, we're going to want to make a decision and then we're going to find ways to do it, rather than someone does a thing, they say a tweet, they do a thing, and then they say, okay, well, this is in breach of our policy because of X, Y, and Z, and now this is our response. And I think personally the second half of that, or the latter part of that, is a better way of running things, and a better way of running a social media platform that says, well, look, we have very clear guidelines on misinformation. We have very clear guidelines on specific hate speech, or where the line is, right? And this is that conversation. It's important to have a conversation around decisions that were made or weren't made by a government, by an organization, by big tech, etc. But we shouldn't limit the reach of that just because it's an unpopular opinion, in my view, because I think that's how it can be very shifted and one-sided. Because if you don't give it a fair crack of the whip, you then only have what's being allowed to be seen as the popular view, instead of having a more and I guess the counter argument would be, well, that's against the controversial-esque stuff that you could say that get people riled up and fire these social media platforms as algorithms because of the comments, the shares, the likes, etc. But I think for me, we need to, and as a society, as a community, as social media users, as big tech, etc., there needs to be a better solution. There needs to be a better middle ground than, we're going to censor something that might get us, quote unquote, in trouble, or is not a very popular view, as long as it's truthful, of course. And I may not agree with it, but I'm still going to allow that to exist in that respect as well. There was also very, very quickly, I don't want to bog down the show necessarily with just this, but it was proven and reported by The Hill that social media moderators, misinformation reporters, federal health advisors, and national security officials have got misinformation wrong, right? So it's not even like necessarily, and that's not pointing a finger and just you, right? We don't always know, and some people can get it wrong even if they are in an official position. So it isn't necessarily, I don't think the solution is anyway, that the government is the all-hearting solution for what is and isn't misinformation. It should be what's factually true and what can be proven with science and scientific facts in that regard as well. So I guess this does kind of end. I'll end this topic on a question for you, which is, what is your view? Do you think that social media is moving in the correct path at cracking down and helping obviously our young people not see a lot of this misinformation? Because to be honest, I think a lot of it is in quite adult conversations anyway, regarding politics, regarding policy, regarding terms and conditions. These aren't necessarily things that are going to in some ways bleed into the youth, and I think we need to be careful. And I think, as I said, I kind of lean back into the first conversation that we had about, or should children be on social media, and if so, who's that responsibility? Is it the government? Is it the parents? Is it down to the social media platforms to vet it and say, look, this is not okay, or this is what we should have, or should we have children versions of the apps? I think that's a more important conversation, because I think we can't have a free democratic state or a free democratic reality if we're not given all the information to be able to make our own decisions as adults, which to an extent, if that's the reality we want, and that means children can't be online, or they have to have a different version of the internet, or they have to have a more kind of walled off, protected version, then I think that's a positive thing, and that's something that we should do as a society. But I would love to hear what you think down below, so do let